Is that how you would define love, Lightwater?
No, I think desire is loose from love, but they are somehow connected. That's what I see. I think desire, love is concentrated in the heart. Desire is concentrated in the lungs. But
Okay.
how they influence each other, they have kind of stay out of the out of each other's way, but still connect.
Yeah, maybe desire is the wrong word to use, but I feel like love.
No. I really, I really love, and I desire that it's true. But I think it's a good point, very good point. There is a need for connection, but there's also a need for being apart from each other. So, and maybe that's the right concept for two souls feeling unity, but also uniqueness, right? So it is disorder and order. So it's chaos and order. Yeah. Entropy and what was the other word? Entropy and equilibrium. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's probably two walls of consciousness, the polarity. For me, consciousness means there is polarity, and between the polarity there's a room. Without polarity, consciousness would be a robot state, right? If you only got one source where that creates consciousness, it is just one thing.
Amen.
So that places an odd point at what SE always says, that you can talk with two voices. And I don't like to discuss that with him, especially, but it is a ground on which you can go many ways, and that's probably what it is. Each one of us is unique, but we still desire and long for togetherness, oneness.
And when two souls unite, they create a child, which is like a representation of that synthesis, I guess.
Yeah, and you can see that child as something physical, but also metaphysical, of course, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's why, a human represents a triangle, the mind, body, and soul. And then when you combine the two triangles, you get the Jewish star, which represents the combination of opposites, or the unity of opposites, which is represented by the number 6 and so on. 6 representing the physical world and stuff like that. I mean, the world is full of so many mysteries. Like, I don't even know if it's possible to figure out everything. To create a completely unified, not even talking about physics, but just like having an understanding of God and all that stuff.
Yeah, probably if you would understand everything, you couldn't live in a body. You have to enter the spirit world then. Yeah.
I'm considering buying a dab pen next week. Should I do it? Should I get back on the devil's lettuce?
Kind of, yeah, like at the level of the source of creation and all that, is 1,000 years ago happening for its state of consciousness, just like this moment is happening for ours.
Oh, I see. Okay, well, I actually think Source is beyond time. So Source lives outside of time, so if it wanted to experience that, it's basically, yeah, I think Source is experiencing everything at the same time. If that makes sense. It's experiencing everything at once. So it's experiencing the past and the future and the present all at once.
Okay, so from that perspective, the past is happening right now for that state of consciousness. Because that's kind of originally what I was wondering if you thought that. So like, yeah, for that source consciousness, if everything is happening for its state, but doesn't that mean it's also happening for the individuals, like at that time, like 1,000 years ago, that is happening for, like, they're experiencing? I don't know, it's pretty intense. It's kind of like, it's like fractals within fractals.
I personally think in the last 2,000 years we have been digesting the past, and because we have become aware that we have forgotten something about ourselves, and we are opening a period where we live more into the future. We are opening a gate into the future. That's what the title of the film, Back to the Future, is signifying to us.
Amen.
So I think that is a big weight we will lose. That is part of gravitation. We are carrying the weight of our past with us, and we are starting to remember who we really are. That's what the awakening is about.
If you dwell too much on the past, it will give you depression. If you dwell too much on the future, it will give you anxiety. That's why it's best just to live in the present and enjoy it.
But if you are given what your real fears are, it enters your consciousness in that way. You have a situation in your consciousness that you can handle, because fear and love are two both ends of the same stick. Like hate and worship is also two ends of the same stick.
Really? What about hate and love? I feel like hate and love are the two
No,
ends.
it dawned on me that I was reading Conversations with God, and there it was said that love and fear was two ends of the same stick. And of course I was confused, because indeed many times where we hear love and hate are somehow connected, belonging together. So I've been pondering about it, and in essence, love is something you want to embrace. So in a horizontal way, you want to bring it to you, but I come to it later back that and fear, in first essence, you want to push it away. Also, an horizontal action on the surface. But in both cases, when you keep embracing love, you suffocate it. So you have to also let it go again. And the same is with fear. If you keep pushing it away, it always come knocking at your shoulders, I'm here. So if you know your fears, you also know your love. And then I started thinking about hate, and in essence, what I came to conclusion is that hate, you want to stamp it into the ground, that it doesn't exist anymore. And worship is putting something in height above you. So it's a vertical action.
Oh wow, I like that actually.
So in that way, you can allow all these things together as long, but in the consciousness that you don't necessarily attach to it. So if you hate something, you don't have to make it an action to eliminate it. Just say, I don't like it. I don't give attention to it anymore. So you can kind of hate someone, but still let him go, let him be, right? He doesn't need to be eliminated. And that's with a lot of emotions, as long as you don't attach to it into action against somebody, but it is more a direction to know your own inside. Kind of your own manual.
Okay, going back to the math subject. Hopefully my audio's decent. If not, I will mute up. But I've heard some people say that to describe, improve, and measure. I don't think love, hate, and jealousy, just as 3 different examples from the moment, are actually measurable. I don't know what you guys think about that one.
You're probably right.
Pi.
Math can describe a lot of things. How a building is built, point A to point B situations, and the list goes on and on. But when it comes to other things, it's not measurable. I think emotion and spirituality is not measurable.
Pi.
Is it pi?
Pi. It's not measurable.
Oh. Okay.
You encompass something. You encompass something. It's not measurable. Pi. Transcendental. That's what you were talking about.
It's irrational, just like emotions are irrational. They're not logical. They're irrational.
Well, it's labeled as an irrational number, but it's still a transcendental. You can't measure it. Anyway, that was all I had to say.
Well, irrational means there's no ratio. It can't. Yeah, exactly. It can't be measured.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, because to measure things, you use a ratio, like a ruler. An inch is the ratio, and then the thing that you're measuring. And yeah, it's probably correct because each person has their own experience, so it's hard to put a ratio on that, right? Each person's unique.
The reason I bring that up is because even though I somewhat despise the guy Aaron Ra, or however you pronounce his name currently. I don't know why he changed his name to that. But he said, math can describe everything. Well, he said math and science, I think is what he said. I'll have to pull up the exact quote. But I listened to him during one of Jaren's live streams, maybe 5 years ago. And then Aaron Ra was basically saying that, yes, math and science can describe everything. I don't think that's the case. Not even, it can describe a lot of things, but it cannot describe everything.
But that's not even what science is, dude. Science is supposed to be the explanation as to the hows and the whys, and math is supposed to be the descriptions of those explanations in like the physical sense. So it doesn't make sense that to say that math and science can describe everything when that's not even the purpose of science to begin with.
I would agree. I'm just re-quoting what he was saying, and I disagree with him. And I agree with you. I think that was Jeremy, right?
Close enough. What's a better version of Jeremy? This is
Okay,
Jeremy
sorry.
2.0.
Sometimes I get confused with the verbal intake.
But who was saying that? Who were you quoting?
Aaron Raw, the guy that looks like a Disney supervillain or something. That's what he looks like. He does it on purpose. Hardcore atheist, and he's well versed in a lot of stuff he talks about. But he's also very
Dracula.
eloquent. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was just say kind of a Dracula kind of vibe. But go ahead.
Yeah, but he looks like sort of like a fat version of Jafar from Aladdin. You know, it's a little bit of a ad hominem against him, but he's doing it himself. Like he's choosing to look that way. Always wearing black and drinking red wine. It's like, there's something weird about the guy. But if you watch his videos, I haven't watched one in well over a year. He knows what he's talking about in certain circumstances, but he just denies everything else that goes outside the bounds of what he's already researched. And he is now a dead set atheist, Glober, which is, I have no idea what else he believes in and what he joined the Church of Satan, he said. That was like the last video I watched of him. And he was just kind of like joking at it. He's like, yeah, I don't believe in Satan or heaven or hell or God or anything like that. So he just did it as a joke to say, yeah, I'm joining the Church of Satan. And he's like, oh yeah, I got my membership card or something like that. He's like, oh, boo, or whatever. And now I'm a Satanist. So I'm like, I don't know if you're a Satanist, but either way, you have to watch his videos to completely understand. So Aaron Ra, it's Aron space R-A. I have no idea how he derived.
I think there's a lot more Satanists out there that don't even realize that they are Satanists. Like if you look at the core principles and antitheses of Satanism and shit, like I think it's the 7th one is to essentially replace God with science. And it just, I don't know, there's just so many little things like that that just seem like these mainstreamers have just fallen into a religion that they're not even aware they're within.
Yeah, it's scientism.
Yeah. Scientology, scientism, Satan. I mean, it's all kind of like, they're all very similar in a lot of ways, if not almost completely.
Science and seance. So similar. They have a seance to do science.
Yep.
Well, it seems like it is pretty like sick at the root of it because it's like this cult. It's like a cult of like manipulation, getting to manipulate people's minds in a certain way, and it does have like those characteristics of the way certain like toxic cults can have. But I mean, they don't really like demand that you have to go with it though, which is kind of cool. That kind of shows that they really don't have like total control though. They're just like trying to be like the most subscribed to channel in the world basically. And they force that with the schooling system because then they're like, okay, I mean, children are like, well, nowadays there's all the social media stuff, which they also control a lot of. But I mean, back when we were like going to school in the 90s and stuff, it was like, we were all just basically like subscribers of the school system, unfortunately. Like if you view that like a YouTube subscriber kind of thing, except we were like forced to, we didn't really choose to, but yeah.
Yeah, I don't even know if there was an alternate choice. I mean, it just was what it is.
Yeah, it was like fully like that word inculcate. We were like inculcated, like indoctrinate as well, but they just like planted these ideas in our minds, and then they just were there until we either questioned them or, I guess some people maybe they got stronger and they try to defend them, and then other people question them and they dissolve. A lot of the things that were false. I mean,
Yeah, it's like
I knew they were lying to us early on. Like even with just cannabis alone, I was like, what are they doing? I knew there was just a massive corruption just from that alone. But what were you gonna say, Dazzle?
I was just gonna say, like when like people are most convinced by the answers they find themselves, and when they lead you a trail of breadcrumbs to kind of bump into these answers that you just self-discover to a degree, um, you know, it's like people get convicted on that to the point where they don't want to see any other possibility. And it just seems like we've like what you're saying with the school conditioning, like we've all kind of had these like just preconceived notions that, you know, reality works a certain way and things are, you know, a certain way, and there is no real alternative explanations or answers to a lot of the things that science is putting forward, you know, without being some crazy conspiracist or mad scientist, if you will. But, you know, it's like the second anybody starts stepping outside these like boundaries they've created, it's like you're ostracized, blackballed, labeled, you know, segregated, and just kind of like frowned upon. And it's like almost in every branch of science, dude. You know, like there's only certain boundaries that people will approach, you know, out of fear of losing credibility, you know, and those are the voices that matter most. People that are already signed on and bona fide within the mainstream that can point out the inconsistencies and hypocrisies and say, look, you know, this doesn't add up. You know, I've gone down every avenue. I'm not getting sufficient answers as to why. And I mean, it's on multiple fronts, dude. You
Dude,
know,
that's
whether
like it makes me think of this phrase like a generally accepted conspiracy fact. That's what that makes me think of. Like that's what I mean by that is that it's like pretty well accepted, and not that everyone calls it a conspiracy, but you said that word and then it just made me think of that. So it's like just that what you just said, because like even like the like okay, in various other like well, there's various other areas in which that happens too, is what I'm saying. So like within the world, and what I mean by like generally accepted conspiracy fact is pretty much that like it seems like it is pretty much accepted that everyone knows you'll get blackballed, you know, and then it's not like fair in that way. But it's also like contradicted what they'll also say, oh, but the peer review system's legit, you know, as well. But I guess what I'm saying is that like it's not necessarily like agreed upon as to who's doing the conspiracy, but just like the way in which all of the like political and social things go with that. So that's why I was kind of it's like a lot of people just kind of generally accept like, oh yeah, like you're going to get blackballed if you go against the mainstream, and nobody really necessarily says, oh, it's for sure a conspiracy and those people are doing it. But it's like nobody's really. It's like, why is that even a thing? Because it's just strange. It's like a program of sorts.
yep, when people feed into it, it's like they kind of like prop each other up by, you know, how in with the system they are, you know, just drinking the juice, regurgitating the nonsense, you know, as if it's fucking fact and it's just nothing but dogma. Like, I don't know, bro. It's wild, dude. It's a wild time. But I really truly think that the real fight is at the core of academia, you know, beating on the core of academia for formal debates on these topics, you know, and that's why I really commend, you know, people like Eric Dollard and James Tour and Brian Forrester and just these people that are on a, you know, like lone wolves on a mission to kind of push the boundaries and, you know, really question the narrative, you know, and see if it holds weight and expose the, you know, the inadequacies. And I think they're all doing a real good job. I'm sure there's many more, but yeah, I mean, these are the real pioneers in my mind, at least.
Well, it's like this kind of understood that there's like some sort of hierarchy that everybody just sort of abides to, and it's kind of wild why everybody does abide to it in those ways. I mean, people do break against it though. So yeah, you do have people that um well like even like so like the graduate school I went to, and then like one of like so one of the things that we do study or that I did at the graduate school be considered like archetypal astrology, even like using those two terms like archetypal astrology, which is there's archetypal cosmology as well, which is what the one of the professors I studied with there, that's what he calls his work. And then and then the archetypal astrology is not only him, that's actually a larger field. But anyways, my point is that like the graduate school, it is like a fully accredited school, but it's also you know, we were able to study archetypal astrology, like so actually looking like the historical cycles of these luminaries and studying it, you know, in a graduate school setting. And that's pretty rare. Like it's very unique and rare that like a fully accredited school would also have that. However, and then that like one of the main guys, Richard Tarnas is his name, so Rick Tarnas. He is one of the main guys. So what I'm saying is that like basically this. So he wrote a book called Passion of the Western Mind, and basically it's like an entire review of like the entire like modern mind, up to today and going through. But it's all the history that like is the mainstream history. So it's kind of like it's a very mainstream kind of book in that way. He's going through like the Greeks and the whole like the development of the modern mind and stuff, and it is all accurate from that. And he went to Harvard, and he's very like he has a he's very well educated and all that stuff. So, but nonetheless, like he because of the astrology part, astrology is deeply like rejected, in this mainstream of it all. And so my point is that The Passion of the Western Mind was a book that did not have astrology in it. It was all like the mainstream stuff. And that book ended up being taught in like, or I mean, that book is used in like, college and graduate schools like all across the country. It's not like necessarily one of the top ones, but it is quite, popular as like a textbook in that way. But then his next book was called Psyche. No, it was called Cosmos and Psyche. It's his whole next book where he goes into all the archetypal astrology. And yeah, he's had to experience all the like, people, kind of writing him off or whatever, and then like you said, the blackballing kind of thing. I mean, luckily he found a way to, with this graduate school and everything, to be able to do his work, and he's been able to do all that. But I'm just saying, like, if you sat and talked with him, he would definitely, I'm sure, share all about how when you talk about just astrology itself, you get completely treated differently and all that stuff. So my point is that, but like Rick Tarnas, he's not like a conspiracy theory guy though, as it were, even if I use that phrase. Like, I think he thinks the moon landings are legit. I mean, I haven't talked to him in some time, so I don't know exactly where he's at now, but I mean, he's not like, I mean, maybe he has heard more now and stuff, but I mean, he doesn't think like even the moon landings are fake and stuff, like, as far as I know. So, anyways, my point is that he's pretty like mainstream, but he also, understands that kind of, mentality within the paradigms and all of that. He's very knowledgeable with how these paradigms and how the kind of resistance occurs, but perhaps maybe he just doesn't even, it's like he accepts that there is like a way in which people are conspiring to make this pattern, but he doesn't necessarily link it and say, oh, there's actually conspirators and there's more going on here, at least at that level of it. Sorry, I know there's a lot. I just went on a roll there, but I'll pass the mic.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, astrology probably would be one of those branches of science that's, close to being
They call it
fringe.
pseudoscience. Yeah, they call it pseudoscience. But I mean, in this case, it's being taught at, a fully accredited graduate school. So, I mean, in some part, the mainstream is actually, on some level, maybe they're not agreeing to it, but it is able to exist, at least within the system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you've got to look at Edgar Casey. I mean, he used a lot of astrology to do a lot of his work. I mean, not that he was necessarily a scientist per se, but I mean, he was really accurate. And it seems like most mainstreamers today, like, really only see science being applicable through predictions and predictive models. So, I mean, why wouldn't astrology be right up there with astronomy if that's the case and it's usable, as they like to put it?
Yeah. Well, it seems like they separated those at some point. The current like reset or paradigm, whatever's going on in this current thing, it's like they fractured those, because astrology and astronomy were always one. They were always one practice. Like, you would want to know the positions of all these objects to the best of your ability, but you also want to understand what they represent, what the sky clock, how it's functioning in these different cycles. And in that sense, like, you can use these alignments. It is basically like that phrase, like archetypally predictive. It is 100% archetypally predictive. I've never seen it fail, not once. If that ever happens, that would be like a complete, like, that'd be something different. But it's like it never fails. In terms of being archetypally predictive, meaning that, like before COVID hit, everyone who knows what the positions of the luminaries are, like on the more kind of astrological or the luminary level of it, knew that in 2020 there was going to be a Saturn-Pluto alignment that was going to be coming in for a couple of years. Now, they couldn't have necessarily predicted that it would have been COVID in a way. They couldn't, unless they're like psychic or they have some other ability. But I'm saying just from the actual, like the luminaries, the archetypes themselves, they couldn't really tell you it would have been COVID, but it would be 100% archetypally predictive that like the main theme and like the dominant consciousness during that time is going to be like the wave pattern of Saturn and Pluto are going to be peaking, and that combination specifically Saturn Pluto, and then how that relates to on so many levels. And you can look at previous Saturn Pluto eras. See, in this case, it was a conjunction as well. So it's like that's like the new moon. It's like when the two objects are right next to each other when like the new moon is occurring. So yeah, this was the conjunction. Whereas it was the last when it was 180 degrees when it was at the full moon. That was during 9/11. So COVID was the next evolution of the Saturn-Pluto cycle from 9/11. The next major one, because you have the 180 degrees, that's like the full moon position. And then now this is back to like the new moon. So those are the two major axes of it. So like you could have 100% predicted that it would have been a Saturn-Pluto era, but you could not have known concretely it would have been COVID, unless you had some other ability to see the future.
That's very interesting. Does that mean like the next Saturn Pluto alignment is probably going to be 2039? Is it like every 19 years?
Yeah, so they have these the slower moving ones, which they call them the outer planets in their heliocentric model, but they're much dimmer and they're actually not slower, they're actually faster and dimmer. They're actually moving faster with the fixed stars and therefore progressing slower through the zodiac. So ironically, they're actually moving faster, and that's what's actually empirically observed. But in the glow model, they actually say that they're out there and all that. But they actually would say they're moving fast too. They're just so far away. Anyways, but what are you saying? Sorry, I got distracted for a second. What was the last thing you were saying?
I was just asking if the Saturn Pluto cycle is every 19 years.
Oh yeah, and I was saying the retrogrades. Yeah, so the slower moving, they're the outer planets is what they call them in a lot of the mainstream stuff because they still call them planets. So like basically, if we include like Saturn, Jupiter, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, but specifically like Uranus, well, really like Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto are generally considered the outer planets, and then like Saturn and Jupiter are kind of like in betweens, and then you have what they call the inner planets, but that's all in the heliocentric. But they are dimmer. Like Pluto is a lot dimmer, but it takes like 237 years to go through its entire cycle. So it's actually moving like it's moving almost as fast as the fixed stars in a way that it's only moving slower than the fixed stars at such a lesser amount to where it takes 237 years. Whereas the moon is going like a lot, is going a lot slower. Therefore, it makes a much faster motion. So I'm just saying, technically, Pluto is actually cooking along faster when we actually watch it on the ground, than Mars, for example, because it's actually going with the fixed stars at a faster rate, which is what causes the whole. Everything's moving slower in the fixed stars, which makes it move through, which is how the sun moves through the whole year, because the sun moves a little slower in the fixed stars, and everything else is going a little slower in the fixed stars as well. But Pluto, because it's 237 years, it's actually going faster. It's like the fastest luminary, really. But it also goes into really long retrograde cycles, though. So that's the thing about it. So like basically, like if we like Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, they're pretty much retrograde for like half of the year. So, a lot of them. So yeah, when they're in direct motion, they are moving faster. But when they're in retrograde, yeah, they're moving slower in terms of their progression through the zodiac. But yeah, so I guess my whole point in saying that is that it can fluctuate, the exact years because of those. Sorry, that was a really long-winded way of getting to the point of saying that, because of the fact that they're retrograde for like half of the year, some of them, depending on which combinations and then which part of its retrograde cycle it's in, because they're in these very complex retrograde cycles. Like Uranus is in its own thing, Pluto's in its own thing, Neptune, etc. So like if you're talking about like we're talking about like the Saturn Pluto, I would just want to look at the ephemeris because of the retrograde cycles to be able to tell you the exact year of the next one you're saying.
Yeah, I was just trying to, predict the next bad event that happened.
Well, I mean, the Saturn Pluto is one of the most brutal cycles of them all. It's when all of like World War One, World War Two. Anyways, it's the history of it is intense. Yeah, Saturn Pluto is because Saturn's like the Grim Reaper and it's death in those ways, the archetype of that, and then Pluto like intensifies and impels things with like this like transformative energy that's very intense. Like, so when you have Pluto with the principle doing that to Saturn, it can be very like contracting, and you can get like a lot more like control and situations, or even like death and war, and more of like a hyper control that gets. And they use these cycles. They know this. These guys doing all this are the entities actually. I know for a fact they plan their psyops with these archetypal alignments. There's just no question in my mind. Like Saturn Pluto came in right like Saturn Pluto started making a conjunction here. I have it pulled up right here. I could share the screen and stuff, or I could just say it real quick. But like by the beginning of 2020, the Saturn Pluto was fully in effect, and there's no question in my mind they planned the COVID thing for that Saturn Pluto conjunction. All of the themes of it, like social distancing. I mean, I could go and say so much about all of the different ways in which that's Saturn Pluto, but like the control, like lockdown. That is the most Saturn Pluto phrase possible, like lockdown, because Saturn would be like the locking and that part of it, and then Pluto is like with power, like locked down. Anyways, with the whole like power dynamics of it, like the masks. There's so many levels at which the Saturn Pluto and the more like surveillance and just control over our lives, and like more limitation of being able to like isolation and control, and then people being in fear as well being activated.
Well, it might not have even been one of their plan. It might have just been the energy that cycle naturally gave off.
I think it is happening on the higher yeah, because the source of everything there's no doubt about it, the source, the creator, the creation, as it were, whatever you want to refer to it as, like it's all seemingly every moment of creation seems to be perfectly timed with these things. So like, okay, so the Saturn Pluto, it is Saturn Pluto, all of like a lot of the ways it came through, and in a way that is that. However, there's also entities on the earth that don't have our best interest in mind, that are looking, aware of this, and they're like, okay, we know all the themes of Saturn Pluto, we know all the previous ones. They've been doing it for hundreds of years, if not longer, however long they've been in power or whatever. Because when you look at the Saturn Pluto cycle, it's literally like World War One, World War Two. I mean, you look at every single cycle of it, and then the 90 degrees, which is in between that happened during the Great Depression. That was a triple. That was Uranus, Pluto, and Saturn. That was the complete breakdown of that. But yeah, I mean, I do think like the creation is just doing it in its own way as well. But there are entities that also seem to know about it and then use it. Yeah. Like they use it for an evil intent, and that's the thing. And then they convince us it's pseudoscience and that it's just complete BS. And then they push the heliocentric globe thing and saying no, it's just all because of gravity. So there would be no meaning that Mars is a planet out there, or Jupiter. So yeah, they try to suppress all that. Meanwhile, they're using these actual alignments to sway people's emotions and minds, and then people are not aware of it, because you could choose to express those things in a different way. Like instead of getting captured in like their fear, if you're aware of these cycles, there's the potential to be like, okay, well, I actually want to express that, in a way that is more beneficial or productive or positive rather than, whatever those kind of ways that those forces are trying to use them, or those entities are trying to use them or manipulate them or bring out like the darker sides of it rather than the positive sides. Because these alignments seem to it's like there's the negative and the positive in each one. So there's like negative Saturn Pluto, but then there's a lot of positive Saturn Pluto stuff as well. It's not all negative, although Saturn Pluto does kind of have a tilt towards the negative. Whereas something like Jupiter Uranus has a tilt towards the positive. Totally opposite, because Jupiter is like expansion and growth and Uranus is like breakthroughs. So when you combine expansion and growth with breakthroughs, that one's like generally very positive and has much less of a negative kind of tint on it, but there can be some negatives to that too, that combo. But yeah, so anyways, they all have their positive and negative.
Yeah,
So
I mean,
you can choose how you navigate, is how a lot of people see it, who have kind of studied this.
yeah, Saturn has a lot of occult meanings, like the hexagon of Saturn represents the black cube, or it represents, the nexus of reality that we're stuck inside. So yeah, well, like time, death, that sort of thing. And then Venus is named after the god Freya or Frey or whatever. That's like the goddess of love. And then Mars, the god of war. So yeah, there probably is symbolism with all these planets. And then like Mercury, that can represent like enlightenment, or turning Mercury into gold or something like that. Like, they say Mercury was the messenger of the gods because it was the fastest and it would always, spread the message.
Yeah, so Mercury kind of ping pongs back and forth between the sun. So it's pretty interesting. It's like buzzing around the sun in a way. Never gets further than like about 21 degrees from the sun on either side. I kind of think of it as like a phasing. I don't really think there's any indication that they're necessarily balls going around each other per se. But I do think there could be like polarization when these different energies come together, which could even look like a shadow possibly on some footage, but it's actually just the polarization of that object interacting with the other one. But yeah, so Mercury is like fast in that way. It's kind of pinging back and forth between the sun. It's the fastest thing that does that. Like nothing. Venus does that too, but Venus is slower. And then Mercury has a bit more of an intense retrograde cycle because it happens 3 times a year for 3 weeks. So Mercury, yeah, it's just got this like systematic 3 times a year. Each time it happens, it lasts for about 3 weeks. It's really more like 5 weeks because there's like a week before and after as well where it's affected. So yeah, Mercury is like a little, and then the sun like represents like the self and the identity. So it's like the mind buzzing back and forth around your head in a way. Because yeah, Mercury does represent, like astrologically, it's very well accepted that it represents, in general, it's like thinking, writing, talking, language, the kind of mercurial. But yeah, like it's connected to Quicksilver, but yeah, it's connected to the mind. So yeah, everything that's like writing, talking, communicating. Then it's connected to like data transfer as well because it's like the messenger energy. So that's why it's connected to computers, and that's why like computers often go down, or there's like a much higher propensity for computers to crash during Mercury retrograde because of basically computers are just blistering Mercury Quicksilver energy just zipping through, and that's like the part of Mercury is like the communication and that actual process that's occurring. So like that's why like if it goes retrograde, things can start to get like misaligned in computers, and then boom, you get like sometimes you get a really weird crash too, where it just crashes, and then whenever Mercury stops, goes out of retrograde, it just fixes itself. Like there's so many things like that even that are pretty wild. But yeah, so it's connected to communication on electronics for that reason, since electronics are doing tons of communication between all the parts. And it's all like electrical.
Yeah, I would say Uranus and Neptune are the most mysterious planets. They're like the hardest to understand, I would say.
Which one's Uranus and which one's Saturn or Neptune, you said?
Yeah, Neptune.
Well, so we had a Uranus-Neptune conjunction from about 1985 until about 2000, even upwards of 2005. When it's a conjunction, what they call the orb, which is the degree of how close it is, that actually, when it's a conjunction, is generally more. So you could maybe stretch it to like 2000, a little bit beyond 2000. But yeah, we had a Uranus-Neptune conjunction from 1985 all the way until about 2000 to 2005 area. For there's a whole like 15. I mean, like the tighter part of it was really just like the 90s, when you think about that, because it was like, okay, from 85 to 90, it ramped up to it. And then boom, it was like full blown Neptune or Uranus Neptune. This is a conjunction, pretty rare thing because Uranus and Neptune are very takes a long time for them to get to a conjunction. So it's a pretty rare thing. So yeah, it came in about 1985 to 90, but really like 90, and then just the whole 1990s was a completely Uranus Neptune saturated era on every level, the whole 90s. And then yeah, by the end of the 2000s, it started to fade and shift. And then of course 9/11 came in, and that's when the Saturn Pluto came in 9/11. So now instead of totally different energies, like Uranus Neptune is very different than Saturn Pluto, and so the Uranus Neptune party was starting to kind of fade, and then boom, they did 9/11, which was during a Saturn Pluto opposition. So totally different principles. Instead of Uranus Neptune, now it's Saturn Pluto, which then they struck the fear and did the whole terrorist attack hoax. Terrorist attack hoax. That's pretty much what that was. They were the terrorists, and then it was a hoax because they were the real terrorists. But then they told us other people did it in a different way, and then they pulled it off in a different way and made a whole media event of it. But yeah, so Uranus Neptune, like the whole 90s, is a quintessential era of it. Now that's like something that's happening for the whole decade. So obviously, like it's like coloring the whole decade, but it's not necessarily like going to give you the whole picture of the Uranus Neptune archetypes, because like they have their own unique parts of them. But then when they come in combination, they then combine, and then we see all these expressions that come through. The entire internet is from that Uranus Neptune conjunction. Like basically, we didn't really have the internet before that Uranus Neptune, and about 1985 is when the mid 80s is when the Uranus Neptune started coming in, and we now have the internet. So completely connects with like Neptune's like the principle, like Neptune's connected to like the waters, but it's like the interconnectivity between us, because it's connected to the liquid and waters as well, but it has to do with like the boundaries that dissolve, like like it has a connection to that. So then with the Uranus is like the technology and the innovation. So it's like the technology and the innovation of Uranus ended up connecting with the Neptune of dissolving the boundaries, and now like we're all way more interconnected because those boundaries have all been like just dissolved through the like Uranus coming in and breaking up the like boundaries of that, like Uranus bringing the technology and the energy, but Uranus is also like the principle of like revolution and rebellion, so it tends to kind of break things up and bring something new. And in this case, it seems to like that in that one way with the internet, it's like the Uranus kind of broke through the boundaries of Neptune to where now we're all like interconnected, for better or for worse. But yeah, it's like we all have now just like total high speed internet with all this interconnectivity, which we just didn't have before that came in.
The Uranus Neptune is about visionary breakthroughs, new collective ideas, and sometimes escapism or mass deception. It reveals a shift in consciousness, often through technological, mystical, or cultural movements. Meanwhile, the Saturn-Pluto cycle is about the destruction of outdated systems and building new power structures. These periods often bring intensified government control, economic austerity, collective trauma, and a sense of demand for deep restructuring.
That was on point. Who wrote that?
GPT.
That was right from. Does it say? Does it? It just says that. It doesn't say who said that, because it sounds like that's from Rick Tarnas that I mentioned earlier. Sounds it may be. Does it say who wrote that, or that's literally from? That's just right from ChatGPT.
Yeah, that's literally just right for it.
That was what? I didn't hear what you said.
It was directly from it. I just asked about it, about the planetary cycles.
Yeah. I mean, there is like a field of archetypal astrology. It's not like a necessarily a massive field, like in and of itself. I mean, because there's a lot of different parts of astrology. It is in a way, though. I mean, a lot of the really knowledgeable people are aware of it. Um, and, but I mean, if you type in anything like archetypal astrology, it probably will connect back to Rick Tarnas at some point. Because yeah, he is. I mean, he is really unique in a lot of ways, because a lot of astrologers out there, they don't really understand the actual archetypal level, which is like the base level of what is actually occurring and how these alignments actually come through. So that's where, like, yeah, Rick Tarnas was just on point. I mean, what you just said, like the terminology you just said was pretty good there, yeah. And that fits like what I was saying about 9/11. And then it also fits like, because you kind of just, yeah, the thing you said would have been the 90s, and then the Saturn Pluto would have been when 9/11 happened. Like basically they knew the Uranus Neptune, whatever they were setting up with that, with like the Clinton era, and obviously like the powers that be, they were just letting things kind of flow for a bit there and kind of let it ride. But then it's like when that Uranus Neptune started fading, when the Saturn Pluto came in, they're like, all right, we're doing 9/11, like we're gonna lock, seems like they made kind of like a flex move or whatever. And I kind of think that backfired on them ultimately, but I guess it did play a role for them. So yeah, I guess it did kind of maybe help them in a way, but it was like the beginning of a lot of people seeing through a lot of like that they're doing it at that level though. So I kind of think ultimately it was like kind of backfired on them in the end of the day. But it was good for them for like the first 10, 20 years when everyone was buying it, or a lot more people were. Not even 20, maybe like the first 5 years.
The Jupiter-Saturn cycle is every 20 years, and these are often shifts in how society organizes itself. These are social reset points where new economic, political, and structural ideas emerge. So Jupiter represents expansion and Saturn represents structure. And so some examples are this of 1980 through 1981, Reaganomics, neoliberal boom, free market globalization, and then 2000. This represents the dot-com bubble and the market pop of the dot-com bubble. And then 2020, the shift to digitization, remote work, crypto, and this is the new era of decentralization. And then let's look at the Saturn-Uranus cycle. This is every 45 years. This represents tension between structure and rebellion. Saturn wants order, Uranus wants revolution. So this brings about cultural disruption, technology upheaval, and civil disobedience. This aligns with World War II. This aligns with 1988 or the end of the Cold War. And this aligns with 2022. or 2021 when people were protesting against COVID and then where people were still fighting for masks. So it's like the the structure of Saturn, or like the pro-mask of Saturn, and then the revolution or the freedom of Uranus.
Wait, in which year?
1942 or the World War II, 1988 or the end of the Cold War, and then 2022 for COVID ending. And then we also have the Saturn-Neptune cycle. This is where the cycle of where dreams confront reality. Saturn represents grounds, or like grounding yourself, and Neptune represents dissolving yourself. This cycle builds or breaks down collective ideas.
I'm posting this real quick. If you see in the chat, that was that's pretty much Richard Tarnas I mentioned. That's like pretty much like one of his that's like pretty much his like magnum opus, as it were. Like this took him years and years and years to write. It's a thick book. Like there's a lot. It's a couple inches. Like there's a lot of pages, and it's a pretty intense read. I mean, it goes very in depth, but he basically goes through many of the cycles that we're talking about, and then the different ones throughout time, and in like incredible detail. Like talk about evidence. Like there is just endless evidence of showing how these the I mean, things are always happening all the time. So it's not like, in that way, things are always happening. But in certain times, things seem to be like peaking. There seems to be like a climax of a certain energy, or a certain, whole like milieu of mindset, or like consciousness, etc. Like the way the 90s were very different than the 60s. Like the 60s were Uranus, Pluto. So that was the revolutionary with Pluto, whereas the 90s were Uranus with Neptune, and Neptune is like watery and flowing, so it's just a whole different. That's why like there was all the multicultural stuff in the 90s as well. That's also the dissolving of the boundaries, and the whole like we are the world and all that, like for better or for worse, like that whole thing with the globe that they were all like singing and all that stuff like that. All in the 90s, that's all just Uranus, Neptune, and then the Jupiter came into it at some point too. So it was like Uranus, Jupiter, Neptune. That was in like 97. So like in 97, Jupiter came into the Uranus Neptune. Yeah, so if you think about 1997, that was when Jupiter came in. Because Jupiter swings through faster, so it kind of just comes in for like maybe like a year and a half. And
Yeah, it's
yeah,
like the cycle
one of them was in
within a cycle.
97.
Yeah, it's like the cycle within a cycle. It's kind of interesting how, like, this actually makes sense to me. Like, the part of astrology that says it describes your personality, that doesn't make sense to me. But the part of astrology that like talks about it in terms of cycles and stuff like that, like that makes a lot of sense to me.
But yeah, that book is pretty like, I mean it's easy to read. It's not like overly complex, but there's just tons and tons of like there's so many examples that he goes through for each one, and just showing I mean, I guess you could call it correlation, but the thing is it's at some point it's actually like building like an entire statistical baseline for the correlation. So at that point it becomes more than a correlation. It becomes perhaps some kind of a prediction, as in terms of what it has the capabilities for at that point. Like if you know that history is going to rhyme with these cycles, then you at least can know what to look for, and then what is going to be coming. Right now we're in a Saturn Neptune is what we're in now. So totally different thing with this one, yeah. But yeah, we're in a Saturn Neptune is one of the main ones we're having right now. Conjunction.
Jupiter is the great expander.
The last Saturn Neptune was like 06, 07, and 08. 2006, 2007, 2008. That was the opposition of Saturn and Neptune. And that wasn't that like yeah, there was the whole crash that happened.
Oh yeah, 2008, the 2008 crash. It seems like the next cycle we're in, correct me if I'm wrong, is the Saturn-Neptune cycle, which will come in 2026.
Oh, dude, sorry. I think I had it muted. Wait, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Oh, bro, I'm totally sorry. Was I talking? And then I think I had it muted. So sorry. Maybe it
No,
was.
I think I heard most of what you're saying. Unless you're just talking for like the last minute, but before the last minute, I heard you.
Okay, no, I just had it. I'm muted on my side, so I don't know if you guys heard me or. Anyways, I can hear you now. Sorry, I don't know if you heard what I was saying or not because I think I had it muted. But yeah,
Sorry, you might have been muted. Do you want to just say it real quick? I can
well, I
tell
was
you.
just saying that we're in this now. We're in a Saturn Neptune, and we're in a conjunction. But the last time when it was in the opposition, like the 180 degree, which is like, I mean, you can go to the 90s as well. Like the 90s and the 180s tend to be the most potent points to where it really peaks, like in the collective. Is what it always seems to be. So we could look at the 90 as well, but it's generally a little bit more mild at that point. The opposition is usually more. Anyway, so I'm just saying the opposition, and because that's like the full moon position, and then going back to new moon, so that is like the peak of the cycle, and then back to the beginning of the cycle. If you're just splitting it by just 2 points, keeping it really simple in that way.
Yeah.
Then yeah, the opposition is then obviously the kind of most major like pluck of the string basically, because you're just basically dividing the circle by 2 or by 1 and then by 2 and then by 3 then by 4. You keep doing it all the way through, and then that's what it all breaks down to. But yeah, but the opposition is the 180, so 2 180s make a 360. So yeah, dividing them by 2 to get the opposition, whereas the 1 is like the conjunction, and then the 2 is the opposition, and then the 3 is the trine, because 120 degrees times 3 is 360. Basically, it's just 360. You're taking 360 and you divide it by 1, then you divide it by 2, 3, 4. You just keep doing that. So when you divide it by 3, you get 320 degree angles, making 360. You divide it by 4, you get 490s that make up 360, etc. But yeah, so the opposition is the dividing by 2. So it's obviously like one of the most major parts. But yeah, so I'm just saying the last one, we're in the conjunction now, but the last one was from 2006, 7, and 8, roughly. So that's what I was saying before. That's the last opposition, that period.
What does that mean? The cycle peaks in 2026? I think. Yeah, it's saying that's going to be a good place. 2026 is going to be the emergence of a new spiritual ethos and collective identity.
Dude, no, it's still cooking even in 2027. It's a really long. I mean, even I guess, yeah, kind of into the beginning of 2027 more, because I guess like when it starts getting a little bit later, it might be about kind of completing at that point. See, that's when when the Saturn and from the COVID one, the Saturn Pluto. I mean, like unbelievable clockwork. I was looking at the Saturn Pluto cycles and their retrogrades, and I was looking at how like it was about to come out of its last retrograde, and it was going to make what's called its last pass. So it passes over at its last time. And then from there, sometimes they do retrograde back, but sometimes they don't. And so if it's on its way at that point,
You dropped out, you.
Oh, dude, sorry, I think I cut out. Can you hear me? Sorry. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you did cut out, and welcome back.
All right. Yeah, no, just the last thing I was saying is just yeah. So they retrograde as they go through, but once it hits like its last retrograde, they're gonna separate for their last time. That's generally when the cycle is really in its completion. Ultimately, because if it's still retrograding close to it, you can't really call it yet. But when it's really on, done in that way, like it's shifted, and especially when it's beyond like 15 to 20 degrees, that's for sure starting to get out of range. And right when the Saturn Pluto hit that 15 to 20 degree, lo and behold, basically COVID just ended. It's like it came in when the Saturn Pluto came in, and it ended right when the Saturn Pluto ended. Just like the sun rising after a storm and bringing, warmth and, kind of a thing. So it's pretty remarkable. The timing, it seems just unbelievably like if it just seems like the creator has had to have done that, like with some way of being, like it has to exist outside of time or in some hyper time reality to be able to sync up everything that's happening with the actual movements of all of these like luminaries in the sky, like because then it brings in the question of free will. I mean, I do think we have free will or can have that experience, but at the same time, it seems like this is like these are like the energies that are present. I don't know if you could if you could transcend these or not. If you could not, I don't know. Are they untranscendable? Well, there's a way of viewing it that you have free will within the kind of energy of the time, kind of a thing. So, like if it was the Uranus Pluto in the 1960s, especially when Saturn came into it. So in 1965, Saturn also came in with the Uranus Pluto. Because the Uranus Pluto was for like a whole decade, but then the Saturn came in and all aligned with it from like 1965, and that's when like shit hit the fan and there was just riots everywhere and there was complete violence and like all kinds of stuff was going on. Like when the Saturn came into it. So like if you were alive during that time, I mean, okay, some people felt like, all right, let's go destroy stuff or whatever. So whatever it may be, and then there was like riots and stuff going on. And that may have been like the energy in the air, and that's why they were all getting all like hyped up on it. And then in whatever way it's like being activated. But the thing is, I still think you would have free will in that. Like it's not like you just are like a slave to that. Like if people are doing that, you could be like, no, I'm good. Like I'm not going to do that, And then you could express those archetypes in a really like productive way, where you're like, all right, that energy of the in this case it's Uranus, Pluto, and Saturn. Like if you were like, okay, I'm gonna actually use that to, focus on doing something creative or whatever it may be. Like you could actually just use that energy and harness it in a way that's productive and versus, getting like wrapped up in, anything that's, I don't know. It seems like there was probably some violence and crazy stuff going on that probably was not cool. So I'm just saying, it's like, it's not like you're like, but are some people a slave to it? That's the whole question of like NPCs or like, do they just get captivated by these like collective energies? Because like, you'll see like in wartime, like the Saturn Pluto will come in and then they'll get all these young men and they're all in, it's wild. So yeah, they get everybody. It's like a collective mindset that is connected to these, but it's like, and then it's also like programmed at that level though. They're trying to kind of like, yeah, I mean, I would just say overall, hopefully everybody holds up strong through the Saturn Neptune because it can be a trying one. It can definitely be challenging. And for some, it can be like disillusioning or even kind of uh, like even like kind of hopeless. It can feel sometimes that energy can come through. There's some pretty interesting analysis of the Saturn Neptune with like artists, like people that were either born with it or like expressed it in their art, and then comparing that with the eras.
But yeah, no, Saturn Neptune can have its more challenging sides in general, like in the collective. So they're just somewhat contradictory elements because Neptune more has to do with like the ethereal and the liquid parts of all of reality and all of that, whereas Saturn is like the material and the hard physical part of reality. So they just like in a way they're kind of it's not that those have to be necessarily opposing, but in a way they are. They're not really like completely like water and air are more in flow.
Who you talking to, Gio?